I was like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is that like a messaging thing? Like, are people saying?
People are like trying to decide what they want to do just this summer, and so people are making the hard decision.
I gotcha. I gotcha. I gotcha.
I'll see you at the end.
Cool. This isn't gonna bother me. I have to change it. We didn't change. This one is tried, tested, and true. Cool. Okay. Yeah. No. I mean, it's tough. It's a tough thing when you're spoiled for choice. Like lots of cool things to do. Yeah. Both of them have demands. So I think it's figuring out. I think it's, for me, it's still possible. PhD is new enough that we haven't graduated combined first yet. But they're just graduating first class. We don't do anything. Wow.
Worn out.
Really?
Yeah. We're gonna get our test scores back tomorrow, so I'm getting ready to prepare myself.
Just
establishing.
Man,
establishing a baseline.
numbers have dwindled, huh? Are we that bad? Are we that the louder lectures that terrible?
No, I know that OTs have like their rotations.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's all good. How are we doing? Otherwise, surviving?
We're making it.
Yeah. Daniel, where are you going?
For the international site?
Yeah.
To Rick and Gary, New Hampshire.
Oh, great. I just met with the Rice Business School people today. They're interested in maybe having some MBA students to help with some of the hospital-based QI initiatives.
So do you typically partner with business students to do this kind of thing?
Never have. We've had there's a PhD program at UT School of Public Health in Health Systems Management. So we partnered with them a little bit before, but they're with a business school. They took us to a very nice breakfast. It's like, you guys have money, don't you?
That's what this is like.
But they smelled money on us too. I forgot about what it was like to deal with business people. Because I've just been housed in academia, in the gentle, cozy, caress of academia.
Business people are interesting.
Well, it's just different, like going to, when there's clearly you're trying to figure out, well, what's your angle? What's your angle? I just want to teach a class and I need help.
I feel like academia all the time. It's just like, I just want to teach and I want money to keep teaching.
Yeah, exactly.
That's where we're at.
Do that. Awesome. Well, actually, this is the last one. God, I can't believe it's the last GHICC. It's on medical volunteerism, and so we've kind of like gone through the year and we've done a lot of big topics, and I hope you've learned something about international development, economics, human rights, health systems. You probably look back on the year and say, man, maybe you will, maybe you won't. I hope you will look back and say, I think I learned a few things about how the world works. But now it really does come back to you and to the role of students and to short-term volunteers. There's actually, in the last 10 years, there's just been an explosion in the literature around how to do this well. Like, what are the ways that we can engage? Really, we capture the enthusiasm of students who really want to go abroad and do something good. How do we do that in a way that minimizes harms to you and minimizes harms to local people who may not know that you're a student or who may be expecting something different? And how do we, as a program, negotiate that? So most of the session actually centers on a video that we're going to watch together and go through, and we'll stop at periodic points and just talk about specific situations. The purpose of this is not to scare you or to demoralize you or to say, Why am I doing this? It's really to show you that there is an emerging attention that's being placed on how we manage these sort of things and what you do when you go abroad, especially in the medical world. And that, just like it, as a theme that you've heard consistently throughout GHICC, that there's a legacy that you're walking into where previously, people may have come in and done things that set a bad example, and you're kind of part of that legacy, even though you're not that pure person, right? So we're going to talk about ethics and human rights as it applies to global health work, talk about some of the potential benefits and harms of medical volunteerism, and I use medical writ large, health profession volunteerism. Want us to start thinking about personal motivations as that relates to interest in global health. Talk about some of the challenges you might face as a student in the field during a global health experience, and then think about how differences in cultural values and beliefs and how that influences perception of health and disease. So you guys have heard cultural competence, right? Like that's the thing. Isn't that the thing that everybody talks about these days? All the kids are talking about the cultural competence. What does that mean to you? Mm-hmm. Good. So respect for other cultures, for other ways of life. What else?
Know your customs, so you just don't go and do something completely.
Yeah, so there's a bit of knowledge there too, right? So becoming aware of it and familiarizing yourself. What else?
Going in with the assumption that just because you've grown up one way doesn't mean that it's a better way or it's the best way.
Yeah, and to do that, you really have to kind of you have to know yourself, right? You have to kind of know your own biases and know what you're bringing, and then be very wary of what that might mean for people you're working with. So, I like this quote: "Culture acts as a template for the organization of social and psychological processes, such as a genetic system, or much as a genetic system provides such a template for organization of organic processes." So your genetics, your genetic code at least lays out kind of a general phenotype of what you're going to look like. And culture is sort of the genetic code for how society and psychological processes are organized. So in a similar way, right? And so when we talk about cultural competence, it's really this sort of virtuous circle here where we have individual cultures and biases of a person interfacing with the culture of a patient, country, or community, and then on top of that, actually the culture of medicine or health, right? So you're coming with a certain formation of medical practice or of health professions practice, and it's very different from what you may be walking into, right? So each of these things have their own culture, and they're all sort of interfacing with each other in interesting and complicated ways. So when we look at the world through a cultural lens, this is the idea that we tend to we don't really see the world as it is, but as we are. We don't see others as they are, but as we are. So what you want to be aware of, and those of you who are going to come to do the Bafa activity, will really spend a lot of time on this in a week or two. But you really want to be aware of using your cultural perspective in interpreting behavior and learn to interpret the meanings based on perspectives of other cultural groups. So it really speaks to those points that you guys brought up just a minute ago. I'm going to skip that. I think that's just a funny video. So really, cultural competence starts with you. It starts with your own values. It starts with understanding your beliefs. It starts with understanding what you might assign as stereotypes, and really having the self-awareness enough to realize what those are and what you might be, how you might be perceiving another person's behavior or another person's activities. So then any questions about cultural competence? I don't want to go into a lot on it because we're gonna unpack it throughout this presentation. Okay, but does that have enough nuance for you? Do you feel like you have a good understanding? What bothers me about cultural competence, at least as it is taught in health professions, is that I find that it tends to reinforce the stereotypes, right? So You get an exam question. It says, you are seeing someone of Laotian or Hmong descent. They bring a child in. The child has markings, circular markings and discolorations on the skin. You should call Child Protective Services. 2, realize that this is a cultural practice of Laotian and Hmong people called cupping. And, it's like, so then we start to pattern recognize all the cultures, right? Have you seen those things on test questions? Hispanics don't do this. African Americans do that, and it's sort of in an effort to teach you to be culturally aware, we actually sometimes, I think, the larger we of education sometimes actually unintentionally reinforce those stereotypes. Do you have any thoughts on that? Agree, disagree? All right. All right, I'm just preaching to the choir. Everybody's thinking about their PhD grades. Okay. Let me see. Primum non nocere. This is the video we're going to watch. Let me make sure that it's hooked up nicely so that we have good volume. Whoa, yes.
Africa, a continent of untamed wilderness, colorful cities, enigmatic cultures, heartrending poverty, and more volunteer aid and development organizations than almost anywhere else in the world. With Western media as our guide, Africa is often reduced to a homogeneous set of photo ops with endlessly grateful men, women, and children who simply couldn't go on without our $15.95 a month. This is a stark contrast to our other Africa, of $600 a night safari lodges and several $1,000 treks up Mount Kilimanjaro. Many of us in the West understand Africa and other developing regions to be simultaneously intriguing and in desperate need of help. Volunteering becomes an adventure with the bonus of feeling we've done good. Health professionals can be particularly susceptible to this volunteer tourism. So, medical tourism has multiple meanings. It can be anything from, we see in the media where people are going to location A to have surgery, for example. But it also can be students or faculty who are going for a quick time to do clinical work. Increasingly, medical students and aspiring medical students are seeking opportunities to become involved in global health. This isn't surprising, as many students want a career in medicine because it's a profession of helping. But in an overwhelming desire to do good in the world, the presumption that, as medical students, we can help may be naive at best and detrimental at worst.
Come and see how we can work together, but don't come to try to change us overnight. You want to do it. Some feel that if they go back and collect some money and send it, it will solve the problem. It's a little bit bigger than that. They won't solve the health insurance problem by collecting some money. So health, and come and work with us. We have issues, limitations and challenges, but look at it in a way where you can add on and step at a time. And sometimes you're adding on is recognizing that Africa is out there. It needs a little more than what we have. One day when you are older, when you are more influential, when you are consultant, look at a way you can come out and help Africa.
Part of the reason I didn't come to Africa is because I always wanted to go here as a tourist. So it did play into a lot of the interesting programs went to South America as well, but I've been there in the past and I'd always wanted to go see Tanzania and see Kenya. So it definitely was a factor within my choice to come here.
Honestly, I think my reason was probably more selfish than Liz. I wanted to come to Africa and I wanted to volunteer. And I think everyone who is doing a medical placement here has to admit a little bit that it looks good on a resume. So, I mean, obviously I wanted to experience the culture, I wanted to learn about it, I wanted to help out, but I can't say that it was entirely selfless.
There's these conflicting motivations. A lot of times people genuinely have a desire to work with and for communities, but there's also people who want to have a cultural experience, who want to pad the resume, who want to secure research funds, who want to get into a professional school. That's a big one as well. There's a huge, there's either a perceived or a real need to have these experiences. There's often a section on med school applications or dental school applications or even law to have these experiences where you've engaged with vulnerable communities before.
What Liz and Allie describe is what many of us who travel to do medical work in developing countries may be afraid to admit. Not only do we want to help, but we want to see, and we want to experience the exotic. And despite our wanting to do good, we may not be aware of the consequences of our actions.
And so often we prioritize, oh, having an impact, go and you'll have such a great impact. And then you don't have the qualifier of what kind of impact you're having.
So you can look at, when we talk about medical tourism, although there are...
Any thoughts there?
Sort of all ties into what I think they're about to talk about, which is like the fact that like it doesn't even become really about actually helping communities or doing what's actually most beneficial. It kind of is about what makes the best Instagram post, and then you don't actually do anything long-term beneficial, and it ends up being just a cycle of like giving a man a fish rather than teaching them to fish. Assuming that they need to talk to fish.
Sure. Anything resonate with you regarding kind of the motivations? Sure. Don't we all? Good. And again, it's not the whole thing. I'm going to say this because I've had a few students in the past who felt like when I show this video, I'm telling them how I feel about them, which is not true. I think I greatly appreciate all the students who take this course and who want to do this type of work. But just this is part of the process, is kind of understanding a little bit about what motivates you, and then what that means for what happens to you when you're in the field, right? Especially and certainly in pre-medical programs or in pre-school sort of college level programs, it's one level. But once you're in PA school or you're in OT school and you're in med school, then the experience is a little different. So, and a lot of the people in this are Canadian, so you'll notice their Canadian accent. So medical tourism is where Ms. Anderson is taking us.
Many different definitions to that term. The way that I'm using it right now is to think about short-term medical interventions that take place in resource-poor settings and are led by health professionals that come from resource-rich settings. So, in particular, when we look at medical students involved in quote-unquote medical tourism, we're talking about medical students that participate in the direct care provision for patients in resource-poor environments when they're coming from a resource-rich environment.
Another part is the what I call medical voyeurism, where we go to observe other people, and not necessarily, we go as tourists, not because we have a commitment to that community, but because we want to see. And that's kind of like people stopping at an accident site and watching and not doing anything to help. And to me, that's really disrespectful of those cultures and those communities. And that's one thing that I would like to see change. And I think the way to do that is to have educators basically take responsibility and start thinking about ethics and think about, just would you want this in your community? Would you want people coming to your emergency room, for example, just to see trauma victims and to watch and see what it's like? Or would you want them there because they want to learn and they want to help?
I once had an experience in Tanzania where there were students who wanted to
go into the labor ward because there's so many births there in comparison to what you'd see here. And I let my colleague know this at the university that we partner with in Tanzania, and he said to me very directly, he's like, this is not a Zoom. And that was a real wake-up call for me, and it was a real wake-up call for the students to say, okay, this isn't a Zoom, this is not a place where you can look in on things that you wouldn't normally be able to see. And I think that, you know, any human's privacy and dignity and all of that should be respected no matter where you go. And I think sometimes it's the concept comes along that I'm going to a developing country, so it's okay. They won't mind. They'll be happy that somebody from the Western world with Western medicine is there. And I think that that's an idea that really just needs to be discussed and debunked before people go overseas.
Students get carried away, and many of them want to take out their cameras these days. Cameras, and before long you have it on some website someplace. You know, those ethical issues that come up. It's not as easy as people think, because you know, you go to that environment, you have your camera ready, and you see these things. Must have a picture of this, and then we forget all of the things that you would necessarily have to do here. And that is the greatest danger. That students feel liberated once they get to these environments. So all the rules and regulations that limit your access in a country like this, you suddenly feel liberated. You can do anything you want. And sometimes in some of these countries, the gentleness of the people there, and so they don't want to tell you that you can't do those things.
It's very exotic to go abroad, and this gets back to the medical tourism thing. You know, there's a lot of people that really want to travel to the world, and that's great, and people should do that. They just shouldn't do it under the guise of going somewhere and helping someone for a week or two, you know, in an unsustainable fashion.
I think that there are lots of questions to ask, and I think that students also really need to ask themselves those questions about what's my motivation, why do I want to do this, is it for my CV, or is it, you know, to truly further my knowledge of global health? Is it vacation? And it's okay to, you know, do a global health experience and also put a vacation on it, but the global health experience is not actually the vacation. I think that that's what students also need to realize.
So the question of whether, when you're working clinically, whether you're going abroad to see exotic diseases, just talk about them at dinner parties or in the presence of colleagues, or just to have that kind of experience in your back pocket, versus going abroad to get exposure to things that you're actually going to subsequently utilize.
Global health within the larger world of aid is entrenched in moral presuppositions, making our motivations to engage in it very difficult to question or to contest. But asking why we choose to participate is essential. Despite good intentions, working in under-resourced areas may not be a priori a good thing. Questioning can be very uncomfortable, and the answers may be unexpected, especially when the ethical waters are muddied by competing motivations.
Like what is the reason that you're going over? Like, what are you hoping to achieve? And by doing so, are you causing more harm or are you doing good? I mean, all of us come with the intention of helping out, and that's what we really want to do. But when you really stand back and look at it, like, how much help are we really doing?
When students come in and they say, I want to go overseas because I want to make a difference, I have them break that down. What does that mean? What does a difference mean? What are really your learning objectives? And maybe those learning objectives can be met within Canada. You know, you don't necessarily need to go overseas. So it's really looking at what the learning is and what would be the best environment for the student. And that learning environment, like I said, maybe here, it could be overseas, but being very clear about the learning objectives.
The other aspect is that when people are coming with a service mentality, they're typically accompanied with good intentions. something I like to talk about is that good intentions are insufficient as a premise from which we can decide to pursue these global health projects. Because just because we have good intentions doesn't mean we have the experience and knowledge, the breadth of worldview to actually contribute something of value.
Even our best intentions to help may be based on a paternalism created by the Western media barrage out of Africa and other developing regions that creates an image of vulnerability and need among the people exposed. It demands that we help them, a moral imperative.
One of the things we lack the most in the healthcare professional, among healthcare professionals, is humility. You know, you go to a remote area and the young doctor knows as much as you do. And you wonder, well, I have all the books, I have all the journals, I have internet at my beck and call. I have 100 senior doctors teaching me. This guy has one person. And he doesn't have internet, and he doesn't have the journals. How did he know this? You know, and you come back with that humility.
And I also believe that one of the biggest learning opportunities is realizing that in a developing country, it's not all poverty. That we have an incredible number of partners with experience and training that is above and beyond our own experience and training. So one of the pieces that students learn is there are great partners, and they are there to learn, and they will gain a lot through that learning experience. And that piece, I think, surprises many of us.
My recommendation for medical students going on electives is to consider it entirely as an experience of education rather than an experience of service. Because I think there's something important to say about an approach. And if you go into an experience with the expectation that you are going to help or that you're going to serve a particular population, I think that removes an element of your humility.
I guess the point was that we're medical students.
Thoughts? Huh? Yeah. Think.
I thought that was a really good way to think about it, which is, to ask the question, okay, beyond like what are your goals? Going abroad, can you actually, would that be best served in the place where you're at? I think it was a really important series of questions to ask, and then also the point that good intentions are not necessarily enough to do something.
Yeah. What else?
That was nice to think about going into a more specific, which scale instead of just going because there is a lot less practice that you get to scale things more easily, but it's still pretty good. So I think a lot more for that.
Yeah. I was trying to imagine how it would feel if I were a student. I was just genuinely interested and curious, and then my faculty said, "This is not a zoo. This is a hospital." And just how shocked I would be. Did that resonate with you guys as well?
Mm-hmm.
What were your thoughts?
I mean, just like, it's difficult, I feel, for some people to eliminate the sort of tourism attitude from themselves when they go to someplace that's different, regardless of the circumstances. And so it's easy to sort of forget that the circumstances you're entering into are the circumstances of a place of respect, a place of health care and learning.
Any other thoughts?
I liked the touch that they're doing on how it can be very paternalistic to go there and assume that, because I have all these Western things, this Western education, tradition and everything. I know how to do medicine better than the people there. It's like I don't know Swahili. I'm not going to be able to talk with people there and figure out, the stuff they're describing. I mean, we have our own idiosyncrasies. They found that, like, back pain, for example, in the U.S. is there's more car crashes in was it Romania or no, it was one of the Baltic states. More car crashes there with worse outcomes for people's backs compared to the U.S. Yet there's more chronic back pain in the U.S. compared to that. So I think there's probably a big sort of cultural psychosomatic thing tied up with that. So whenever anybody comes into an ER here in the U.S. and says they have back pain, there's a whole lot of things to consider. I mean, first off, is it a nerve problem, but it can also be a really big psychosomatic problem that seems to be a uniquely American one. I don't know what's uniquely Kenyan or uniquely Ugandan. The way they describe something, they kind of describe it in less graphic terms for one thing than another, and I have no idea why. Maybe there's just all sorts of unknowns that you're not going to know unless you're kind of born and raised in that place and that culture around it. So, the people who live there are going to be a lot better equipped to navigate those specifics than I am.
Also, sort of the challenge of like I'm there to serve, which rather than like to learn, which heavily implies that like you have something they don't.
I'll tell you, I mean, that's a hard thing because I think what motivates a lot of people to do this work is service. Service to humanity, service to vulnerable communities, service to, the reason week one, we made you write on a note card why you want to do this, and so many people said, I want to serve. And, there's time for that, and there's, as the very intimidating Ugandan consultant said in the video, that's the first lady who was talking, I find her very intimidating. You come back when you're ready. You come back when you're ready. So that, that's the time to serve, is when you really have the skills to offer. We really find that this issue of conflict, from running the program when I lived in Africa to here, what's interesting is that it's still I have these sort of issues with medical students, which I haven't had here, where they would sort of, almost like what they were being told was that they would somehow be serving or be providing a service, whereas when I got there, I'd say, no, you're here to learn, you're here to observe, learn from, learn with. You're not here to set an example. They were from UPenn, so maybe that had something. But I find it harder with residents, right? So as we get more training, we actually do develop some skills. And residents are in this they're in a little awkward land where they're not full-fledged practicing licensed, clinicians, but they may have had some more experience with it. So they actually have to negotiate when there is an area of knowledge, like interpretation of EKGs. Here, that's like, by month 2, every resident in internal medicine is reading EKGs, right? But there an EKG you may not have a machine, or it may be working only sometimes. So when you get that EKG, it's like, so thus the experience is a little bit. So there's ways to transmit that experience back and forth, right? Maybe they can teach you something about malaria. Anyway, any questions? Moving on.
We don't have any skills.
By the way, not to distract you, but as the time goes on in the video, in this one, particularly, she's, I think, in Uganda right now, or Tanzania, and as the night is coming, you could start to hear really distracting bullfrogs. Okay, just I don't want to. That's a cultural thing you should be aware of. Anyway.
Real skills, like we can't do any prescription writing and stuff like that.
So we need the support of the community in Arusha, and because the resources are already so low that we take resources away, and we gain a lot from the experience. We learn a lot. We get to see all the people, and are we really just coming and kind of like poking into these people's lives and then leaving? So that was like the big ethical question.
You shouldn't see this sojourn as, it's a nice place and saying, some good beaches, some nice wildlife, and I just go there because it offers me the chance to travel. I think if this happens now, it's detrimental for this country because it binds a lot of resources.
By coming to learn in under-resourced areas, medical students risk stressing a system already short on funding, and perhaps more importantly, short on health professionals needed to teach local students, who are more likely to stay in the area and provide ongoing service. And students aren't the only ones who risk draining the systems they visit. Physicians and volunteers in other sectors may take more than they give, particularly in short-term initiatives.
So the North American students were a bit frustrated that they don't get enough time with the physicians. We were a bit frustrated that they want to be taught throughout the day, whereas our system is slightly different.
What's the impact on the training of healthcare professionals in the location where you are visiting when you visit? So does your presence create a drain on the healthcare system? For example, are there nursing staff, if you're a medical student, are there nursing staff that are providing translation services for you while you're in direct interaction with the patient, and what really that nurse, given her expertise, should be probably involved in her own work rather than facilitating your potentially irrelevant interaction with a patient that you probably won't be able to directly help given your level of training. Is there a medical, say you're in Tanzania, is there a Tanzanian medical student that would be benefiting from this patient interaction if you, the visiting medical student, were not in that position? And I think the tricky part for medical students is that potential drains on the system are not readily apparent during your experience. So personally, I did a medical elective in Arusha in Tanzania. I recently had the opportunity to meet a dean of a medical school in Tanzania, which shall remain nameless at the moment, but he was explaining to me that his number of visiting students matches the number of actual Tanzanian medical students. And because of that one-to-one ratio, his students are disadvantaged in terms of supervisors, in terms of even lecture time. So that was definitely not readily apparent to me when I was in.
When physicians come, we sometimes find that some take up a little more time than they give back. Either they need to move with a Ugandan physician, do everything together, and even after the work has been done, they want someone to be with them, take them, and they find that, I won't say babysitting them, but some people here feel that we don't want people who are going to babysit. We want people who come and work with us. We give them a batch of students to teach. We show them what to do, and they can teach them without me having to stand next to that physician. Otherwise, you don't get much. Both of us are doing the same thing.
And I'm sure that happens in the nonprofit sector as well. You're so busy keeping new students, new volunteers in the loop, and so busy trying to bring them up to speed and get them to learn the language and get them to understand the project that's going on. By the time they're actually competent enough to, carry the torch, it's time to go home.
Even when they commit their services to a host country, health professionals from Western countries can inadvertently undermine local health professionals by bringing the appearance, whether true or not, of better care to patients desperate for more.
One of the things that I worried about was that patients don't know who
if they think we're, the white doctors from USA or from Canada, and we show up and we start looking at their files, I'm worried that they get a false sense that we're going to come in and come up with a miracle cure. So I think it's very important that they know that we're students and we're learning. I had one moment where I think Kelly and Jen and I were just reading a patient's file and sort of discussing it, and she was sort of looking up at us, and I thought that maybe she thought we were going to do something different than the doctors there and fix her child. And so I just that made me think about the effect of us even just being in the room and how the patients would react to us.
So the first time we went and we met with the Pendo group, we went to their church where they all meet, and they were so gracious and thankful and lovely to us that it was a little overwhelming, because they would be like, oh, you've come and you are saving our lives, the work you do here is so wonderful. And we were like, whoa, we do nothing of this sort. And so that's very overwhelming. They put a lot of trust in us, and it gives them a lot of hope that something will be done, and that scares me.
Emotions.
Thoughts?
I think that something that was interesting to me was the fact that if students from here go there, native students miss out on their own education.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's something that would definitely concern me, because it's I can get an education here, there, anywhere. I can go around the U.S. and get that. But for them, it's this is what they have. And I don't know if they send their students abroad too, but that's their primary center, and so I would be concerned if, are you stepping on someone's toes by doing that?
I like that. What else?
Yeah, I was saying, being the other layers being in charge, you assume that they do something in that situation. I was in Ghana, and I had multiple times when they came to me as soon as I was finding that I was a provider. They had human doctors there, and so they were more lighter skinned, so the lighter skin was typically the red doctor. I don't know why that was the situation, but so I got asked multiple times, oh, what's wrong? I'm not a provider, I'm not a doctor, I'm just a student, and I wasn't the case through the time, so I was just a student volunteering, I don't know anything. So I constantly say that I felt bad, because I was just I'm not actually a doctor, I can't do anything for you.
Yeah.
I'm just here to take notes.
I think it's not to demoralize you. I mean, those are things we have to think about. Actually, if you find yourself in that type of situation, it means that as a program, probably we've also done something wrong. Because, we try to be pretty clear with the people we work with, and we don't want our students to be a burden, and we want them to be a benefit. And they tend to look at, when we send our students, they're looking at it just another cup of water in the soup. 5 students in a seminar versus 8 students in a seminar. And when we send them to Nairobi, boy, in the Kenyatta National Hospital, you're talking about a ward team of sometimes 20. You can't even see the bed, because there's so many learners. And so that's the situation where I think the students have felt like, well, maybe I'm taking away from something. Also, I think there's a flip side which they don't mention, which is, when we would have medical students in Botswana, there's this saying that one of our students here actually said in the first year back, that she said, what I've learned in global health is, if you're feeling useless, stop being useless. And what she did was, said, hey, you know what? I'm going to make sure that every day the charts are in the right order so that we can speed up rounds. Or I'm going to make sure that the lab is I got to go to the lab and pick up the paper to put in the chart. I'll do, figured out a way to. So I think, yes, there has definitely been times where students say, hey, I paid a bunch of money for this experience, traveled 10,000 miles, I want to learn some stuff. And we also, we have a ton of people to teach you. But over there. I think it's just being sensitive of that. Educators are also a human resource, and so to be mindful of that, but not necessarily to let it, get in the way of you learning something.
Do we have any program where they come to us, come to practice at UTMB?
I mean, not so. UTMB is extremely strict, and it's hard. Like, this is any institution. It's very hard and expensive for someone from a resource-limited setting to come and do a short-term rotation. The only institutions that we have received students from that we also send to are Caribbean institutions, a couple of them, and then Peru. We've received up to 17 people from Peru in a year, but I send 60. So the ratios are not to Peru. I send 60 a year and receive 17 max. So it's not equitable. But also, I mean, if you imagine, someone from a partner institution in Uganda coming here, a student, how to self-fund that, that's thousands of dollars. The arrangements are all there, but it's just much harder. And there's no, it's hard enough for us to find scholarships for you guys. It's impossible to convince a state institution that they should pay for someone from Uganda to come here, even though that's the moral, ethical thing to do. What else? Good. Preparing for the challenges. Is this okay, guys? A little bit of video, a little bit of charla.
Many of them look at a patient and watch a patient dying of a problem that could have been easily handled in their country.
The other thing, sorry, she was talking about, people needing to go with other physicians. I remember when I worked with the PEPFAR program, I was actually not permitted to see patients alone. So it was in the grant. It said, no, if you're going to see patients, you must be with other physicians, and that caused a lot of tension because I said, you're coming out here, why don't you sit in the clinic and see some patients for us? And we ended up bending the rules and doing it a number of times, but we couldn't count that. Right? So you have to think about it. So you think about it on a program level. So our program said, this is a mentorship program. So you have to, if you're going to see patients, you can't see them independently. U.S. government is not paying you to see Ugandan patients. The U.S. government is paying you to mentor Ugandan physicians so that builds capacity, right? But they really many times wanted was just an extra set of hands, and sit in the other clinic and take some burden off. And you know what? That's what we did sometimes, right? Even though it wasn't in the grant. So that stuff does happen. Sorry to interrupt you.
Emotions. Many of them look at a patient and watch a patient dying of a problem that could have been easily handled in their country, and many of them are badly affected by this. And the worst part is that our patients are young people. The mean age or median age for patients with NPT is about 33 years.
I think the challenge there is just students coming from a different setting where everything is sort of perfect, and then they come here and some people, their world just falls apart and they can't totally believe what's going on.
There's a lot of things looking back that we should have done more of. We spent a lot of our time doing fundraising work, which was important because the money goes here and the money goes to sending us here, but in terms of preparation of culture, of language, and stuff like that, I wish we had done more of.
Preparing for these challenges demonstrates respect for host communities and can mitigate negative impacts. Students are at further risk of having a negative impact, however, when they engage in clinical activities beyond their level of training.
I have known students who've applied to medical school, who've been involved in being involved in surgery, taking history, being involved in clinical practice that they are not even engaged in the training for,
and that is an extreme situation, but it's not uncommon.
We didn't really have a good idea, like, we knew the name of our placement, but we didn't really know, like, what exactly we'd be doing, or how long we'd be working, or where, or the kind of stuff we were expected to know. Because you come here, my first day, within 20 minutes of being at the hospital, I was given a needle, told to go take a blood sample. I was like, well, you know, I'm not trained to do this. I'm still an undergrad student. They're like, just go.
Like my first day at the hospital, the doctor just said, come over here. And there was a woman in labor. And he said, put on gloves. And I put on gloves. And he said, now grab the head. And I said, okay. And then he just said, now pull. And I delivered the baby. And that was essentially within, 10 minutes? 10 minutes of walking into the hospital on my first day, I delivered the baby. And
I was terrified. But the thing is, I was in a room, there were 2 nurses there, and the doctor was gone. 3 of them went into labor at the same time, so the 2 nurses delivered the other 2 women. There was a woman there with no one to help her deliver a baby. So I'm unskilled, but I could support her perineum, and when the baby comes out, I can cut and tie the umbilical cord and deliver a placenta. So though I'm not the most skilled person in Canada, I'd never, ever be allowed to do that. But here, when the choice between like me and no one, there are different standards because there have to be different standards. I'm not saying it's right, but better than nothing else.
As a student, you are guided by the curriculum within your university. So if you were a Dalhousie student, you are very aware of what the parameters of your training are. And that doesn't matter if you're working at the Children's Hospital here in Halifax, or if you're working at the Children's Wing in Tanzania. You are guided by the same set of parameters. We forget that when we are in another environment.
And I believe that it doesn't have to be medical violence. I think that there is no such intention. I don't think that when it happens and it falls smack into the confines of medical violence, that nobody intended it to be that way. It's just taking the opportunity, because you didn't expect that you would get this opportunity. You know, you are a second-year student, for example, and you end up in a country like Guyana, and the surgeon is more than willing to kick you into the theater. You know, they're doing open-heart surgery, and they let you in and allow you to start handling things, and so that wouldn't happen here. And you start looking into things, you start taking pictures and so on. These are the reasons why it has to be structured, so that the students and the facilitators understand the parameters within which we work. Whenever these things happen, that we can call medical voyeurism, some people call them cowboy medicine, or something like that, it's because we don't work with structured elements. We do not have the parameters established. But let me just say that quite unequivocally, there is always benefit.
See, he's about to bring you out of the negative. What do you think?
It sounds like the students were saying they want to
Yeah, so that should not happen. Right? Can you imagine like how she must feel? Like, that's what an awkward situation. So to answer your question, the hospitals get a message. I mean, I've been there to most all of the ones that we send our students to, and then if we're not sending you to our partners, we're sending you through an organization that has these conversations on our behalf. They're written by they're organized by the same people who make these videos. You'd think that they're not going to engage students in unethical things, though it's really hard to prevent. So no, you should not. They know you're coming in as first years or as junior students. They know that you're primarily focused on project work, but there's some clinical observations involved. And they know what a first-year student can and can't do. I had an experience 3-4 years ago in Uganda, in fact, at Rugagiri, in Yachibale Hospital, where Daniel's going to go. So the then hospital superintendent or chief medical officer, the surgeon, great guy, and I sent our students the first year, no problems, sent them on outreaches, they did their projects, it was great. Second year, I sent 4 or 5 students, and I got a call. I got an email from one of them that said, "Dr. Dasho, I want to run something by you. I want to make sure we're doing okay here." And when I talked to them, they said, and I was so proud. Like my heart was so proud because I knew we'd watch this video together, and they knew that we should be paying attention to what we're asked to do. And they said, Dr. Ronald says that he wants us to, by the end of the rotation, we should be able to deliver a baby, and we should be able to do a C-section. And he wants us to draw blood, and he wants us to place IVs, and he wants us to put Foley catheters. And I said, man, okay. So literally, I was going there the next week. So I emailed him. And I said, hey, we're going to talk about this. And so I had that conversation on the students' behalf. It does come up, even if we've had those conversations, because what he told me, he said, what, your medical students can't do anything? Like, I expect my first-year midwife students to be able to draw blood and place an IV, place a Foley catheter at least. So we negotiated, right? And so the idea is that if they want students to learn how to do something, I can teach them here, and there's a process that we can make sure that you've practiced it, you've at least been theoretically taught, you've got to practice on simulation equipment or whatever, then you can do it. But also it was a question of understanding what level junior students are at and what they could and shouldn't be doing. And then he opened up and told me this story. He said, yeah, I guess that makes sense. He said there was this guy, there was a woman volunteer, I think she was a social worker, and she brought her husband, who was a doctor, he was a Dr. Jones or something like that, and he asked if he could scrub into a C-section, just to kind of be a part of it, and he said, sure. So he scrubbed in, and, they said, well, they got the baby, extracted the baby, they finished, they massaged the uterus, and then they asked him to close, and he said, oh, no, I'm a veterinarian. And so he said, oh, yeah, I guess it makes sense, sometimes we should set expectations. I mean, so those things, even though we try to avoid them, still do happen. So that's a great question. Sorry for the very long tangent. But, I mean, for me, we had, when we were receiving students in Botswana, there was initially enthusiasm to do procedures, but sometimes, it involves, you're sticking a needle into sometimes someone's back or there's pleural space or stomach, and form consent, and do it, and it's quite complicated ethically. I always just tell people, if you wouldn't do it at your level unsupervised here, you shouldn't do it at your level unsupervised here. But if it's something that if for example, we have first-year students that go and do a preceptorship in anesthesiology, and anesthesiologist said, hey, you want to place this IV, or you want to learn how to, put this airway or check the airway, and, so it's about, supervision and mentorship as well. What else?
Mentorship and teaching there, because I've had experiences where they didn't expect me to already know that, like the student said, by the time you leave, you should do these things. And so I'd be like, well, I don't know how to do it. It's okay, I'll teach you. It's like, I don't think I should be learning. And they're like, well, why am I not going to teach you? Because I'm one of the EMSs.
Did that happen to you?
Yeah.
What was the procedure? What was
It happened. One of the ones was like wound cleaning. That was really simple, and I was just terrified to do anything at all. One of them was doing an LP, which I thought would be able to do this. I don't even know the anatomy to do that, so there was anyway. I was going to learn, but another student did it.
Yeah. Huh?
And that same situation where I was like, oh, here you can do this. And I was like, yeah, I can't. And they're like, oh, I'll teach you. I was like, I don't think you should.
Yeah.
Yeah, one I think was like a Foley catheter. I was like, no, I don't know what I'm doing.
Why is
stuff like that, where they just like, oh, I can teach you. And I'm like, I don't think you should.
Yeah.
If they're like qualified educators, like I guess I'm just curious what the specific issue is for being educated on how to do it. Like if they're teaching you what you would have learned here, and what exactly is the specific issue? Because like I know people who go do like preceptorships here over the summer, and then they learn a lot about like some of the basic stuff that they would do, that's help with surgeries or different things like that, or help in the clinic, and like why is it that like if they're willing to teach you how to do it, like obviously within reason, like a C-section is one thing, like placing an IV, like why is that?
No, I don't think that's off the books. I think it's the question of being properly taught, supervised. You know, as a program, we don't tell students they can't do stuff. We tell them that, you know, that they have to be. Well, first of all, we ask our partners to tell us they want them to do stuff, and generally, at first year level, the places we work with, they have plenty of other students to do it. And sometimes those other students will teach you, right? And you have that opportunity for hands-on things. But I think it's more of a question of things that you would not do here at your level, right? So an LP even would be probably a little, even though you might be able to draw the neuroanatomy, you know, it may be out of your wheelhouse, right? So wound cleaning though, gosh. We can get a college student to do some wound cleaning, right? But it is still like uncomfortable. It's a wound. It's also possible exposures, right? So there's anytime you're involving a needle, there's a possibility for exposures. So, you know, the places we work, we've made sure that there's a chain of command for exposures. If there's a needle stick for whatever reason, then especially in a high prevalence HIV area, then there's a protocol that's followed. Those are all the things that kind of have to be thought about in advance. And so the procedure is about risk to the patient and no risk to you. So that's I think the way we ask people to think about it. But we don't make any rules. You know, when they said we want the students to do Foley's, I said make sure that they know the anatomy, make sure they can draw the anatomy, and potentially, you know, that they have good supervision, and then it's all right. But that's basically the way to approach it, I think. It's a good compromise. But it is one of those things to anticipate, especially in a clinical situation, you might be called upon to do those things. The question is, should you? And the argument of, well, there's no one else. What do you think? Because that seemed to be, I mean, one of them was like, listen, I mean, there's 3 ladies in labor, there's 2 providers.
Isn't doing something really worse than doing nothing?
That's the question. That's the thing. Like, the ideal would be that student would never have been in that situation in the first place, right? Because it's unfair. It's unfair to ask you to have to do that type of thing. I mean, so much can go wrong during a delivery, right? And you know, there's all of the, are you a provider or what? You put it on a timer? That's right. So anyway, well that launches us into so it's not all negative, I promise. Positives.
For anybody with any kind of health literacy,
whether it's in medicine or counseling, lifestyle choices, health promotion, whatever it is, there's benefit to such persons being in various communities, particularly the developing countries where they don't have access to all of the resources that we may have in developed countries. So I want to say that quite clearly, that as a minister from a developing country, I believe there's huge benefits to be derived from students, faculty, experienced healthcare providers from one environment to come and join us.
Oui, je pense que c'est très très important. Ils doivent venir parce que un jeune étudiant qui passe toutes ses études en Europe ou bien au Canada ou aux États-Unis, parfois il ne s'imagine pas que quelque part dans le monde, la médecine existe dans de mauvaises conditions. Donc, ils doivent arriver. Un bon médecin, c'est un médecin qui doit s'adapter à toutes les conditions, mauvaises ou bonnes qu'elles soient. Donc, c'est important qu'ils viennent parce que je suis sûr, les mêmes, un médecin, il n'est pas seulement un médecin d'Europe ou du Canada, c'est un médecin du monde.
With all the questions and ethical pitfalls, a moratorium on medical student electives and projects in developing countries might seem inevitable. But the growth of perspective that comes from witnessing how others live outside our own experience, and the development of a sense of social responsibility to the health of the world, may be one of the most important reasons to continue supporting medical student global health programs.
I mean, we are part of a global village now, and I think that we're not simply training physicians and others as insular individuals in their own environment. Yes, perhaps our first responsibility is to the people of the Maritimes, for example, in developing a cadre of competent physicians. But I think the way the world is going, that's not enough, that we need to do a lot more, and we need to have more of a sense of responsibility overseas.
Well, the world is a village now. What happens in Africa would soon, in one way or the other, get into Europe, into America, into Asia, etc. So knowledge that is available in Africa should be shared as well to other countries.
Because if you hear about HIV in sub-Saharan Africa, it's different if you are here and you see the problem and try to help to solve it. So to me, I see that it's very, very important for other people from outside sub-Saharan Africa to come and try to help.
I think for me, you don't really understand the problems until you see it with your own eyes. You can watch it on TV, you can see pictures in the movies. It's just not the same until you get here.
I mean, at least as a medical student, not as a doctor, it's very little to do with altruism in the present, at least. I'm not saving anyone's life. I don't even know most of the drugs that are being prescribed to these patients. So I would be completely naive if I thought I was making any difference at the moment. But I think by gaining this experience, hopefully down the road I can be better prepared to serve a community like this.
Maybe 1 in 100 people that go on foreign elective will actually do something long-term in a developing country. Sadly, it's not 1 out of 2 or 1 out of 3. But in reality, only very few will go on to do long-term work. And it's only the people that have a permanent position and spend many years, learn the language, and contribute their lives on a long-term basis that will really make any kind of sustainable impact.
Most of what medical students are able to accomplish is short-term. Academic and life requirements make it impractical to stay more than a few weeks or months at a time. Yet the goal of global health, or really any development initiative, is sustainability. And sustainability depends on long-term initiatives. So what kind of global health experiences for students can serve this goal?
Ones that are cooperative, ones that involve partnership and collaboration. And in the truest sense of the word, and not just, those token words to make something sound good, where you've got true interaction between both sides, where there's that freedom to be able to speak and express opinions, where it's a collaborative effort and not the Western party saying we've got a great idea, and the other party saying, oh, great, we're going to go along with what you say because you're going to give us money. And sometimes that truly happens. You ask, what can we do? And you get a response like, oh, anything's fine. And so being able to get beyond that, and having it so that it's not having it so that there's no hierarchy or, donor and recipient kind of relationship. But I think partnerships that are sustainable, so what's our long-term goal and what's our long-term vision? I think the best partnerships are ones where you can actually see yourself not working there anymore.
Yeah, well, I don't think in terms of filling the gap, I don't think it's a gap that the West can fill. I think the West has an obligation to provide financial resources and knowledge transfer and the other things that will help build a sustainable healthcare system or a sustainable whatever you want to do within the country. And I think that, but ultimately it is up to the individuals.
So I think starting with the question, what can we learn from you? And then we learn from them. And then what can we do for you? Not how can I help you, what can we do for you? What do you need? And you're going to get answers that may not involve you.
But there is also inherently a belief by many of these people that we don't know what we want. I want to say quite clearly that no consultant could tell me what I want. I know what I want. I may not know all the answers of how to do it, but I know what I want.
If there are benefits to overseas global health experiences for medical students, these ethical questions.
Anything resonate there?
The whole aspect of the best kind of partnership is a partnership where eventually you're not needed.
I've decided that yes, it's ideal. But what I've found is that in a good partnership, it just evolves. You're not needed for that thing anymore. You're needed for something else. And the reason you're working together is because you have a relationship built on trust, mutual respect. But it's taken years, right? So you could look at examples like the partnership. There's a partnership that started about 15 years ago between the Moy School of Medicine in Western Kenya and Eldoret, and then Indiana University. And it's called the AMPATH Consortium. And they grew that. They got a bunch of PEPFAR money. They set up a huge HIV program, a bunch of training opportunities for Kenyan students, U.S. students, and residents, and then fellowships, and then they had more and more training. And as that program has grown, they also developed the first open source electronic medical record in Africa. And so it did all kinds of amazing things with that consortium. And as time has gone on, yes, some things they've, because of years and years of time, maybe they're not needed for the initial thing, but the needs have evolved, right? And so that's sort of the nature of these global partnerships, is that they evolve over time. So I think I agree. Yeah, we all like the idea that we work ourselves out of a job. But the truth is that the needs will always evolve. And so it's about having that open dialogue. But yes, I think that's a great thing. What else?
I also liked when she said something like, what can you do?
Mm-hmm.
Something instead of like, how can I help?
Yeah. What can we do for you?
Yeah, I was reading about this place in Sub-Saharan that they were talking about how these organizations like wanted to give out VRTs and help with AIDS, and they were like, well, all I need are the funds that you give me. Like, I don't care if I die of AIDS or my children are starving to death. So it was really interesting to think about, like, I think it's hard to be here and like think about what are the projects I see, or do, what are I capable of, and how can I apply that to this other place? Like, if that's not their primary need, it's not
find with a lot of programs, they sort of, they do the thing that they do, you know, and they're looking for, instead of saying, what are the needs of a place, or what are the existing, what do you want, right? As the Minister of Health from Guyana was saying, it's like, I know what I want. I may not know necessarily how to get there, but I know what I want. Sometimes what I find with some short-term groups is they're like, okay, here's what we do. We do mobile clinics where we dispense vitamins, antibiotics, and we do deworming. That's what we do. So let's find a place that needs that. So that's one way to do it. It's not terrible, you know, but I think the ideal is when you can be demand-driven, right? Good. Anything else? Seguimos.
Must be addressed so good intentions can lead to the desired outcomes of creating global citizens, fair partnerships, and ultimately sustainable healthcare systems. Appropriate preparation is key to this process.
It's always the people who say that they don't need pre-departure training who are the ones who actually need it.
A lot of them come with a kind of a pie-in-the-sky idea that they're going to make a big impact in the health of a developing country, which is completely unrealistic. A lot of them are not particularly culturally sensitive, and so they do inflame the local doctors, in fact, with some of the way they act, some of the things they do, some of the things they wear. For instance, we have medical students that come and smoke on the hospital campus, and to us in India, that's a complete shock. I mean, no one would even consider that a medical professional would smoke, but a lot of European medical students do. And so that's a very cross-cultural experience. A lot of our young women medical students wear very sort of brief things on the word that are not appropriate for what women would wear in India. Which reflects that I think these students are not well prepared for their overseas experience. They come with poor attitudes. They're not humble, and they're not willing to observe what's happening and fit in appropriately, but to keep their own culture despite working in a developing country.
You know, really, if you wanted to really properly prepare for an elective, you'd probably have to take a couple of years.
Learn as much as you can about the culture and the people before you go. What I see with a lot of programs is that people go, and this is not just students' mission trips and lots of different things. If people go to another country, they don't really understand the issues before they go, and they try to apply North American solutions to other areas of the world, and it doesn't work well. And what I found also is if you don't learn before you go, if you just try to go and practice or give, then you may just reinforce your own prejudices.
Is to start. Don't go with the kind of Lonely Planet Guide version of culture, or the National Geographic version of culture, because that's an incomplete picture. I would say find somebody from the country you're going to. Talk to them about what they feel like the issues are.
Can a program really prepare you for living in Africa, India, or South America? No way, not even close. But can it give you some awareness of what you're going to encounter and prepare you for some of the scary things that you will encounter? Yes, I think it can.
If we are to achieve fair partnerships, there is a significant deficit in our current programs. As much as students from the West are able to travel to developing countries in order to achieve their learning objectives, the reverse is rare.
For example, for myself, I had an opportunity to go to study in Europe. I spent time there, so at least I have a picture, a small picture of what is going there. And my stay there helped me a lot.
Partnerships with the universities have grown, and this year we're hoping to see some Thai medical students come here to Halifax to do an elective. So that reciprocity that we've always been wanting to see is starting to actually happen. So that's a very exciting benefit, and that's also reflected in the partnership. And the partnership isn't only a student partnership, it's also a faculty and research partnership. So that the summer program in Thailand is all of the players within the university, and I think that is a huge benefit.
Actually, one of the problems we have had is that we don't get enough South-South exchanges. We need more of this. We get a lot of north-south, by north I mean the western countries exchanges. We get people from Canada, from the US, from some European countries, even from Australia. But we have had a few from South Africa. We haven't had enough students from the other African countries. That's a limitation.
Regardless of where a student comes from, and as important as it is to prepare before leaving, having an organized program with structure through the host institution can mitigate some of the more negative impacts on the host community and ensure that the balance of service and learning is fair to patients and learners alike. Universities, as the institutions that support students, can play a significant role in ensuring that partnerships achieve their goals.
The growing phenomenon of medical students going into different environments and enhancing their education through experiences outside of a classroom and textbook has never been considered as a significant part of our training. So that many people who go and participate do not get the extra credit for it or so on. Because at the end of the day, you will graduate just like your colleagues who never went.
The other piece is the complexity of global health. So we assume that there is a problem and there's an easy answer, but there's not. I mean, we talk about the determinants of health, and they make life very complicated. So sometimes we look at one answer and we try and put a Band-Aid on it, but what it does is it creates a much bigger problem somewhere else. So for example, a student may have identified a partner that they want to work with, but they've not looked at what that relationship is with the university, or that partner with the corporate world, with mining companies, with pharmaceutical companies. So those broader ethical questions have not been explored.
That's what kind of encircles this whole problem is how to.
So I always feel like, when they start talking about these just students running amok and, smoking and dressed scantily clad students sort of just smoking around on the wards, I just can't imagine they're talking about anybody that we've ever sent, right? And I think what you may find is that if you go on an international experience, that there are students who aren't, it's something that I think distinguishes you guys. I mean, you've gone through a prep course, for better or for worse. There's knowledge that you've gained, or at least an attitude and some skills that you've gained as part of the course that make you different. My goal is always that when I get calls from our partners, that they're like, hey, send me more UTMB students. I want these guys that are humble and willing to work and willing to help out and well prepared and and then because it's clear. I mean, I've spoken to a lot of students that come back and say, yeah, there were some Belgian students that were, they would stay out late and break curfews and all that kind of stuff. So it doesn't mean that you're not going to do that. But every once in a while it happens. Right? I want to look good movies. What else? What did you think here about this? Huh?
Smoking is very true. It's weird. And I'm quick at the European culture in that one. Because I noticed that in Europe, they did smoke a lot. And I was like, are you realize you're killing yourself? Like they smoke all the time. Yeah. Especially intervention, so weird. Yeah.
They live forever.
It's definitely,
I know.
It's definitely
And that's
a
their
shock.
excuse.
And then when I see this one people like, I don't know, but that one definitely, when you said that as a joke.
Kenneth, you're quiet. Do you have any thoughts?
Really. Let me take this back a little bit. I was looking at the issue of motivation for people who are trying to go into this volunteer and I try to look at, is there any way, or I see that it's practically impossible to take tourism out of the whole thing because they are somehow interlocked. So if you take tourism out of it, it's going to be less. People are not going to be interested in doing it. Because you find out that those are the things that some people hear like, okay, let me go to Africa and do this. And then it's going to be an opportunity for me to see how the place looks like or what is, in that environment. So it's more like a factor that spurs people to do this. So, but it has also a negative impact, that, like I said, if you have that in mind, and when you get there, then you get overwhelmed. You look at it from the aspect of tourism and not exactly what you came there to do. So it's more like, I don't know how they're going to separate them, but it's practically impossible. So those are the areas that I will just try to monitor and see how possible it's going to be.
What do you guys think?
I feel like it's almost like two sides of the same coin. I mean, both like the curiosity to figure out, okay, how does this disease work? What can I do to fight it? But then also the kind of interest in, oh wow, I've never seen somebody with this advanced stage or whatever. I feel like it's almost the same sort of drive, and it's almost like you've got to kind of balance it and make sure your motivations are I mean, that's so nice.
It's hard to say almost like tourism ideal into the right motivation, like tourism of like more like, because you can have tourists who want to learn and want to do right by the people and do it the right way, but like also if you don't necessarily have that aspect of like, this is something new, this is something different, like sort of what the Canadian lady was saying, which is like there's not necessarily as much of a drive to go elsewhere at all.
I think you hit on a really important point there, which is that I don't think it's bad to say, part of the reason I want to go is because there's just I want to learn about how these problems are addressed in that setting. I want to learn about the spectrum of disease, the severity of disease. Those aren't bad things. It's like being a thoughtful tourist. I want to go to London so I can learn about British history and pub culture. And I want to watch some soccer games so I can learn about hooliganism, right? Maybe that's not going to be. You may not get that academic about it, but I think you're right, Genevieve, that it does draw on that like tourist instinct, like that curiosity, and that's not a bad thing. And I don't think you can dissociate those things. I think it's just being sensitive to. I mean, I remember that I was a first-year medical student, and I went to Peru, and I was in a clinical setting, an outpatient HIV clinic, and I felt awkward because the Peruvian students with me, I mean, they were taking pictures, all kinds of stuff with their cameras, and I was like, are they allowed to do? They were like, oh look at this huge fungus, like, Dasho, come here, look, and it's like. I don't want to, want to be sensitive to the patient, and there's all that. But it was Peruvians doing it, right? I said, no, but am I allowed? So there is an element of it that's, I think it's human nature. It's not like just gringos that are guilty of it. It's everybody, and I think they're good. It provokes good questions. The other kind of tourism, I think, is great. I think that if you go to Kenya and you don't go on a safari, it's crazy. You should, I'm not going to say I'll fail you if you don't go on a safari, right? But gosh, I mean, just these opportunities are amazing, and we know that. So, like, we want to take time to do that kind of tourism for sure. But I think I think it's not even the lesions or the funny rashes or the crazy X-rays. I think it's when it's a human subject, and it's the classic Instagram of a light-skinned aid worker and a dark-skinned baby, and there's
in the street
just you in the street with a kid, and there's a lot of ethical issues there. We had a visitor, one of the visiting Osler scholars this year, if you guys came to any of Mr. John Crispin's events. Came during the Great Freeze, so I think everybody's out of school. But this guy's a photographer who talked extensively about global health photography. I think that's one area where tourism intersects with global health in a very uncomfortable way. But I said the other problem is that when I go around to donors, what are showing pictures of? Like the mountains, the hospital with no people in it. What resonates is seeing. So I had to have uncomfortable conversations with my boss and say, I don't want pictures of students, doing procedures on kids on the website, even if they're de-identified. That's not the impression I want to give. They put it up there. Right? So.
Well, I think that the issue of somebody who's looking, sometimes they have to understand that you separate your lifestyle from what you are actually trying to do. I see an example like when I was, let me give another part of Nigeria. If you are from the eastern part and then when you graduate as a student, then the government is going to send you over to the north so that you go and do your practice or whatever you serve the government for 1 year. So sometime in 1994, we were doing our national youth service and then we were posted in the hospital. And we have to, there's places like we don't understand the language, we don't understand the culture. It's a very kind of like an intricate culture that the language is so difficult and you have to understand how to manage this with your work around it. And we had to distribute the family planning pills and some of that stuff. So we had a lot of problem. Then some of the students who are smoking and doing all kinds of things, and then they ran into all kinds of problems with the people around. So they became a target for some those people. They can kill you for nothing. Something like that. The smoking. If you come in an environment because they're Muslims, they don't do that kind of a thing. So if you do within that way, you become a target. So you can be killed. So we need to be careful, the environment where we are, because if this is what is obtainable in your culture and then come to somewhere else, it may not be obtainable. So you stay up from that.
Yeah. Boy, hopefully we don't have to deal with.
Just to travel, like medical travel, but we travel to certain other countries and they get in prison because they did something stupid, like in Singapore you're not supposed to litter because it isn't great.
Yeah, then you get lashings.
They do that and then they are shocked that they're in trouble. Don't get a passage because you're from another country.
The guy who stole a street sign in North Korea, wasn't that his story? The guy who died on the.
I think he's taking a picture of their property.
Yeah.
I think he actually sold it.
Yeah, so it's like really bad.
Every few years, even and students they roll their eyes when I talk to them about going out on the town and getting drunk and that kind of thing in mission hospitals. But boy, a few years back we had a group. I sent them to GHICC Hospital in Western Uganda. The medical officers were like, "Hey, come out. Come on, just come out with us. We want to go for some beers." And they were out late. They were out past curfew, and some were intoxicated. And it was a Catholic mission hospital. But when they came back, when they woke up the next day, they were hauled into the sister matron's office, the chief medical officer. It's a very intimidating surgeon. She's like this tall, but very, very intimidating. She's a Catholic nun, sister type person. Doesn't mind telling you what she thinks about you. And apparently that night, some of the staff's quarters were broken into and some computers were stolen. And so she was saying, "You guys were out late. What happened? Did you leave the gate open?" And so it created these. Just because those things, they were conspicuous. We had a similar thing in Maua in Kenya where I sent a woman who doesn't drink and a Mormon who doesn't drink. My stories are putting the lights to sleep. These two very, you know, they don't drink. But they went to a party where alcohol was served. And they got blamed for the fact that there was alcohol there. So there was this sort of, oh, these UTMB students bringing all of this badness to
In reality,
it was the medical officers or the interns. So anyway, so those are the extra layers. So there's downstream consequences. So it took about a year for them to forget. But they would always be like, are you telling them about our alcohol policy? I said, they don't drink. I said, like, they're super religious people. They don't drink. They were around it, though. Enablers. Anyway. And they were just trying to do the cultural thing. They were just trying to fit in, you know?
To how to go about defining your role and engaging in a productive way, in a meaningful way, without compromising people's dignity and without becoming paralyzed. It's very easy to become paralyzed when you think of all these ethical questions. Is it ethical to spend all of this money? There's environmental problems with flying 10,000 miles around the planet. There's language issues, there's cultural issues. Is it all worth it? Is it going to make any difference? Is it going to be a drop in the bucket?
I had a tough time with the definition of global health. I mean, I just think there's health, and there's health in Halifax, and there's health in Ishikara, and some places have more resources and more human resources than others. I think maybe global health is looking beyond where you practice mostly and being conscious of serving all of humanity, not just where you're living.
I feel like with a lot of like the ethical conversations, every time I come out of it, I kind of feel like, oh my God, like, why am I here? Like, it's not even worth it. I should have just donated all that money, and like, I'm not doing any good, and like, why am I here? And then I think I just kind of have to step back and remind myself that, I am one of the people who care, and I am someone who wants to do good, and I'm doing everything with the best of intentions. And like, even if I'm wasting a little bit of money, like, some good is coming out of it, and hopefully in the future, even more good is going to come out of it. And I don't want the ethical conversations to discourage people from acting.
But I mean, even saying it out loud, kind of, it doesn't feel very good. I don't think pure cynicism is helpful when you're doing this kind of work, nor is pure optimism. Blind faith.
So I think one of the big things for universities is to keep growing, keep supporting the global health movement that is growing, and to be asking the very questions that you're asking. What are we doing, and why are we doing it? And it's okay to have some conflict in those discussions, because if we don't, we're never going to have a truly strong program in global health for whoever we're working with.
It may often seem that these ethical questions are immobilizing. If there is something to be gained from medical student electives and projects, then that paralysis is a true loss. But maybe there's a reason these ethical questions are so difficult to answer. And maybe that's because they challenge our understanding of the world and our place in it. Answering may be less important than actually asking the hard questions. By challenging the essence of global health and how we fit into it, our understanding will evolve, whether we are learners, teachers, partners, heroes, or voyeurs.
And maybe there's a place for that voyeurism. Maybe that voyeurism is the first trip you take, and then you realize a year later that you were being a voyeur. And then you strive over subsequent time frames and trips to make up for that or to remedy that. I think that's common. I think we talk about the ideals of global health. I think global health, each person has their own path.
And early on in your path, you're probably going to do something, a program or a trip or a presentation or a research project that's totally inappropriate. And that's okay. I mean, it's not okay. We wish it didn't happen, but it's okay because hopefully if you stick with the field, you as a person will evolve as the field is evolving to become much more self-aware, much more ethically oriented, and much more self-reflective to say, why am I really doing this? And then subsequent endeavors, you'll remedy that motivations. We can't help our ignorance and our naivete sometimes. That's a natural stage in the progression of education. So I think people that are voyeurs now see what they're doing.
Thoughts? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Nope, we're not going to do this. So, it's more case. Unless you want to go through the case. You feel pretty good? Yeah. All right. So, a lot of ethical challenges here in international electives. You're probably going to face new ethical dilemmas, I think, after watching this movie and having this discussion. I hope you'll at least be thoughtful about it. You know, these experiences, you know, they're supposed to be hard. They're not supposed to be easy. They're supposed to put you in a little bit of awkward situations. I always tell students that if you have a really great, life-changing, positive experience, then I'm really happy. If you have a really terrible, life-changing experience that turns you off to global health entirely, I'm also not saying I'm happy, but I'm like, well, that's an outcome. You know, it's significant because it means that something provoked you, something made you think, and you said, this isn't for me. But I think majority of people who I've sent and who I've worked with, you know, over over a decade of doing this now, I think that vast majority of people really feel like these things are great opportunities. So we want to make sure you're always well prepared, and this is partly on you, partly on your program. Safety, supervision, culture, and beliefs. What we used to try to say, okay, here's what you need to know about Kenya, and here's what you need to know about Peru, but we were just feeding into some of the same problems. We can give you basic demographics that you can read about on Wikipedia or on the CIA fact book, which, by the way, if you haven't ever looked at the CIA fact book, it's excellent. It's just got all of the information about every country in the world. And then the other thing that we try to do is think about having you add value, and that's, I think, one of the things that makes your experience here at UTMB unique is that because we're putting you into places where we have long-term relationships, the idea is that the students should be put to work doing something they can do, and so that adds value. When we talk about cultural competence, we really are talking about understanding your beliefs and then how you interpret those of others, that you respect the mores and ways of life of people with whom you work, that you shouldn't feel that it's incumbent upon you to change anything, really. The lady who closed the show there is Dr. Jess Evert. She's a friend, and she runs the Child Family Health International group. And their motto is, let the world change you, right? And so I like that motto. I wish I'd thought of it. But it's because it's not really our place to change the culture and judge, but really learn from it and grow. So know your limits, bring enthusiasm, and be helpful. That's my spiel. Any questions, comments, concerns?
But I know this is wrong. That's hard. So I did take some pictures, but I was always like, oh, just no patient in pain, like nothing identifiable.
Well, you notice that there were no patients, like in that whole movie. They filmed faculty and they filmed house staff and doctors and PAs and whoever else, but they didn't have any patients. It's a tough one, and I wouldn't discourage you from should take pictures. You should take pictures. You should just talk to people about it first. Make sure it's okay. I once had a neurology rep. We used to take these once a week for 3 weeks a month. I would take this little puddle jumper plane from the capital of the city I was living in, way out to the western part of the desert. And we would make rounds, and we would do some teaching, and we'd do some work on HIV. And remember, I brought a neurology resident with me once, and he wanted to come on the plane. Everybody wanted to come on the plane. And actually, Penn wouldn't let their students go on the plane because of liability. They let me go on the plane. You're not really ours. But somehow this neurology resident was able to go. He came from Baylor, and he was in some neurology cases. Comes out. He's got his bag. All right. He's got his neurology bag. It must be all the neurology toys, tuning fork, and his reflex hammer, and all those other fun things. So he opens it up. It's a huge camera with like a 400-foot telephoto lens, right? You just expandable thing. It must have been this big. And I said to him, you can't bring that in the hospital. What do you think this is? A safari? We were sort of joking about it. I was like, you can't take that. But then it was also 52 degrees centigrade in the airplane, so it would have melted. So I let him bring it to people. But, it was totally innocent. So he got on the plane, just taking pictures. I said, dude, you can't take pictures of the plane. You can't, take that in the hospital. Also is, what's the impression it gives. But, like you said, in so many cases, I run into this a lot in the Dominican Republic. There's this guy, and I promise this is my last name. This guy I work with named Dr. Goldie Mills. He is an epidemiologist. He's a public health guy who teaches about determinants of health. And I send students to go in, and he's super enthusiastic. He's Dominican. He's worked in these sugarcane plantations called bates. He's worked in those for decades. Everybody knows him. He brings his students out there from the Dominican. These are Dominican students, many of whom have never been outside of a big city or don't know that these conditions exist, right? So there's huge educational value to him exposing his students to these environments. And they're all dressed in yellow. Like he calls them the amarillos. So they're like yellow shirts. So they very much stick out. You know who's with his course. They're all in these yellow shirts, banana yellow. But Goldie, he starts getting his students out there, and he's got his iPad, and he's just photo, Facebook, photo, Facebook. And I've had a number of students very uncomfortable because he's also taking pictures of them. He's like, go stand with that dog. You see, she's giving the vaccine to the dog. Go stand with the dog. Go stand with them. He's taking pictures. So actually, our students have felt a little bit on the receiving end of that exact phenomenon, right? And it's a tough one. I've told him, I said, but what do I say to him? You can't take pictures of these villagers that you go and visit with your students, that they know you and they trust you, but you're putting them all over the internet,
I guess it sort of addresses the difference between a big thing on the internet, I guess right now is that people will go attack, particularly white people will attack other white people for cultural appropriation, and then people from those cultures are like, no, it was more of an appreciation than an appropriation, and who really gets to say that that's a thing that you shouldn't be doing? Should it be the person who is just hypersensitive to externally what's going on, or is it the person who is actually the one in the circumstance?
Yeah. Well, and that also speaks to who's speaking for those people, right? So he might actually fall under a lot of critique from other Dominicans who might haul him in and say, dude, you got to stop taking all the pictures. But it's hard for me as the gringo partner to do that. So I was subversive, and he invited me to give a lecture, and I gave a lecture on community health and research ethics. And in that lecture, I sort of poked fun at him for taking pictures all the time as part of as patient autonomy. But it was more than jest. So figure out your ways. I'm very passive aggressive. Definitely a beta dog in global health. But yeah, what I'm saying is those issues are not limited to students. Like people have not articulated the best answers. There's not like a guideline. But generally, it's the same situation here. I mean, we just have a hospital policy. You cannot take pictures in the hospital. Anything with private information. But we do. We make sure that there's no patient identifying stuff, and then it's like, well, we got to take a picture of the skin lesion. So, you just imagine what would happen if a bunch of Dominicans showed up in our hospital. Oh man, taking pictures of stuff. I had 2 Dominicans come here, and they were trying to take pictures of all the patient safety stuff that was displayed all over the hospital. And the nurses were like, "Why are they taking pictures?" It's like, let's move, guys. They wanted to take a picture of the whole crew. So, those things they continue to happen. And, so you just have to have the privilege of being in a good relationship to be able to have those discussions. Any questions? Anything else? Any other war stories? You guys have been great. Thanks for doing GHICC. Thanks for sticking around. And we will. Are we going to meet again? This is it. Yeah, this is it. Please give us good feedback. We're going to be reaching out to everybody and saying, we tried some new things this year, and namely, we tried some things where we added a service requirement. That was a request from past students. And we diversified the people teaching the course, because it used to be just me and Patel. But we want your feedback on how it went. So be sure to be looking out for that. We respond to feedback. All right?
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Yeah, take care. Of course. Johnson Next. Yeah. Oh, you're meeting with her?
Yeah, for
cool. Yeah, she's wait. Yeah. You'll find the room number and then
Okay. Okay. So as long as I know, I was like, is it Johnson or Cheese? Johnson. Johnson. Alright, I was like,
how are you?
Good.
Where are you going?
No.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I'm excited. Yeah. Number 1. Did everybody basically get the number 1?
I did.
Yeah? Where are you going?
Peru.
Lima or Houston? You should go. Send you anywhere.
I mean, I'll go.
They're working on it. They're recruiting a faculty. No, it's on news tonight.
Oh, Jackson.
Yeah.
He's awesome.
Is
I'm
he
so
here
excited.
yet?
No, he's starting soon. I'm so excited to meet him.
Yeah, great.
His lecture was awesome.
I missed it.
Yeah, his lecture was awesome.
Did he talk about this stuff?
A little bit, yeah. He was talking a lot about that, and he was usually like, basically as a PA being like, especially in state department, he like, I learned what the common care for goat is, because I don't know what that is.